Hello and welcome back to Wyoming Watch from the Wyoming Tribune Eagle. I'm Noah Zahn, your state government reporter here. This week on Wyoming Watch, we're sharing a conversation that I had with our local government reporter, Alyssa Tolman. Last week, she went on a ride-along with some of Cheyenne's city services that manage the city's recycling program. Also, in our conversation, we discussed a handful of other city topics like new muffler requirements, potentially, and restrictions for oversized vehicles parked on public streets going into place. Here's that conversation now. So now I'm here with Alyssa Tolman, our local government reporter, and we're here to talk about a couple of different things that you've been working on, just going on within the city and your local government beat. And one thing I wanted to talk to you about is a story that you wrote last week called Beyond the Bin, a firsthand look at the path of your recycling, and thought it was a pretty neat story. Can you just tell me, I guess, first of all, what that story is generally for people who haven't read it yet?
Yeah, so on Thursday, I did a ride-along with the Cheyenne Sanitation Division, the recycling services. It was pretty much, I just went and I spoke to the manager about the process, and then I rode along with the collections truck where he went around a neighborhood on his route and actually picked up the recycling bins and then took them back to the transfer station. And then I rode with the semi-driver to Fort Collins where he did the drop-off.
And so I guess in this story, what did you learn about how the process works, or maybe what are some misconceptions that you think people might have about how this process works and where their recycling goes?
Well, I did learn, because I'm also new to Cheyenne, that we no longer have our own recycling plant, I guess you would call it. They call it a MRF at the transfer station, which is where the actual sorting and where they send out recyclables to, be repurposed. We don't have that here in Cheyenne anymore. It closed back in 2019. So I guess kind of what I learned is I didn't realize that they go to Fort Collins, first of all. I didn't think it would be that far away. But once they get to Fort Collins, that's actually the end of their route. And then from Fort Collins, it gets transferred to Denver by Waste Management. So, I guess some misconceptions is that a lot of people seem to think that recycling doesn't have any impact in Cheyenne. They think things just go to the landfill either way, but the whole system is really, it's pretty intricate. They know exactly what they're doing, where they're taking things, and where it'll go. I don't think that they end up in landfills.
Mm-hmm. In your story, you write that Cheyenne residents all pay a $195 a year recycling fee, whether they use the recycling services or not. So can you explain in more detail how that fee is used? And you said that the recycling doesn't go to a landfill. How you said it goes to Denver. Do you know what happens after that?
In Denver, it's just a MRF in Denver. They just further sort, process, and break down the recyclables, and they sell it to manufacturers to be repurposed into new products.
And so in talking with these people who work on these recycling trucks, did they explain the importance of recycling in Cheyenne? Because I've heard, whenever I had your position as the local government reporter, one time city council member Michelle Aldridge said at one of the meetings that it's actually more beneficial or more effective maybe to save water by not rinsing off some recyclable items like a can of tomato paste or something like that, and I guess maybe throwing it away instead or recycling it while it's still dirty, because she said that it's, at least in Cheyenne and other parts of the country over here, it's better to save water than to the difference that one can being recycled would make. Is that something that you learned about at all? And, is there a balance between prioritizing recycling but also making sure that you're preserving or monitoring your water usage?
It's not something they talked about directly to me. Just off the top of my head, though, I would think that there's not that many food containers that are recycled, that, the water usage does not compare to the amount of other things that you'd be recycling, it's not balanced in that way. So I don't think, she probably knows more about water usage than I do, but I don't think it's quite that much to where people need to worry about the amount of water they're using to rinse out things. But other than that, mainly what they told me was what could and couldn't be recycled. And then while I was there, actually, the manager got upset because someone had recycled a carpet.
Oh.
Yeah. So, and then he went on a spiel about what can and can't be recycled. But no, I don't think anything about the water usage is that detrimental.
Mm-hmm. And whenever you were on your ride along with these people, did they talk much about what their work life is every day? You know, how many hours they work, how often they make this trip down to Fort Collins? Is that multiple times a day, or is it just once a day?
Yeah, so they actually, I believe they get to the transfer station somewhere between 4 and 5 a.m. and they start the day off with a team meeting to go through their routes and stuff. And then from there, the semi-driver will actually take the previous afternoon's recycling load to Fort Collins as his first trip. And then while he's gone, the collection trucks are going around the neighborhoods and collecting more recycling from that morning, bringing them back to the transfer station and dumping. And then they kind of just do that until the trucks get full. And then when the semi-driver comes back from his first trip to Fort Collins, it's usually around 11 a.m., he picks up the second load, goes back to Fort Collins to dump it. And while he's doing that, the collection trucks are still going, And then that's the load that he'll take the next morning. So usually they're on the road from like 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. is what they said.
And were you got there in the morning? You weren't there for a whole work day, were you?
No, I got there around 9 a.m. And I rode with collections at 9:30. And then I think the semi-truck driver got there around 11, and that's when I rode with him. But the collections ride was only about 45 minutes long. But I joined him in the middle of his collection, so I wasn't there the entire time.
Okay.
For me, it was only about 45 minutes. And then the trip to Fort Collins was about 3 hours round trip.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, that's, I think, about all that we had to talk about for your Beyond the Bend story. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So let's move on to some of the other stuff going on down the street there at City Hall. What have been some of the hot topics that they've been discussing there lately?
Most recently is a new ordinance that they brought up, I think just at the beginning of August, governing vehicle noise mufflers. I guess this was brought up into City Council after the council members were hearing complaints from residents about loud motorcycles and car engines going like on residential roads early in the morning and late at night. And the city actually already has an ordinance governing vehicle noise. It's section 10.24.200. But they want to, or no, sorry, it's section 8.56.050, but they want to replace that with section 10.24200 because I guess the new section they're creating is a little bit more specific and lays out the, rules and expectations for the people citing, like police officers. So that's been a little bit controversial in the car community because they spend a lot of money, modifying their cars, and having a loud car, a loud motorcycle, I guess, is really fun. So they don't want to have to, waste the money that they spent to modify these cars to put mufflers on them or switch engines or whatever it is that may be to make them quieter. So there's been a lot of public comment happening about that, people who are pretty upset.
Mm-hmm. And so this new ordinance that they're considering just is a little more specific that replaces the previous one?
I think so, yeah. From what I can see, the old section is really just one paragraph saying that you actually can't modify or replace an exhaust system on a motor vehicle or operate a motor vehicle in a manner which will amplify or increase the noise emitted. That's pretty much what it says. But then the new section they're creating is 3 pages long, and it has it specifically in section D where it refers to a police officer enforcing the code. It lays out seven different points of what they need to be looking for to cite somebody for a loud noise. So the new ordinance that they're trying to create, basically, from what I understand, says you're allowed to have, you can modify the exhaust system of a motor vehicle, but if you're going to do that, you need to put a muffler on it. So that's kind of the main difference, I guess I'd say.
And so you referenced the enforcement part of it. So if somebody hears a car going down their street that they think is loud, can they just call up Cheyenne Police Department and they'll assess the situation based on those, I think, 7 points that you said. Is that how things will work?
I believe it can work that way. The way this is lined up is so that it can be up to the officer's discretion more than anything. So like if an officer is sitting on the side of the road and a vehicle speeds past that's loud, he or she can use the 7 points to determine that themselves, because under the current section that they're trying to repeal, in order for an officer to enforce unreasonable vehicle noise, they'd have to first find a victim, get a victim statement, and use that to cite the person. Like a police officer can't say, your vehicle is too loud, I'm giving you a ticket, because that ordinance keeps them from doing that.
Okay.
So this new ordinance would allow them to decide for themselves if they can ticket this person based on their own, discretion on what the noise was.
There doesn't need to be a victim.
No.
Anymore, yeah. And you said there's some pushback from the anti-muffler community, if you will. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yes. So it was a couple weeks ago at a council meeting. A lot of people came forward for public comment. They were basically just saying they work hard on their cars. They spend a lot of money to modify their exhaust systems to make them loud. They think, being loud is really fun. And they just don't want their money to end up being wasted. They don't want to have to spend more money and more work, more time putting a muffler on. But I think the main thing at that specific meeting that people were upset about was that the new section would make it to where if you get cited 3 times within 12 months, it's a jailable offense up to 6 months.
Oh.
And so people were mainly fighting that portion of the section as well, thinking that a jailable offense is too high a punishment.
And you said the discussions for this started around the beginning of August, so they're probably getting close to making a final decision on this. Do you have a pulse kind of what direction this is going to go?
I have no idea, because all of the meetings that I've been at, I think it's obvious that the council is in support of at least making a new section. But they've met, I know, with the car community, I think twice that I know of, and they've heard public comment. So I think they're going to reconsider the jailable offense portion. They said that at one point. And they've introduced some potential modifications that have been voted down, but I think they're in discussions of modifying it, taking things out. But either way, I do think it'll pass. Maybe just not as it's written right now.
Sure. And so the last thing for that, what is the timeline on that? When is it going to be discussed next?
Oh, it'll be discussed Monday at the city council meeting on second reading.
Okay, great.
So it should be about another month until we hear like an ending to it.
Yeah. And the last thing that we wanted to touch on really quickly, there's the new oversized vehicle rules that went into place. I know we've covered that before, so we don't need to get into too much detail on it, but can you generally tell me what that is and how things will be different in Cheyenne?
Yes, so it's new seasonal restrictions that go into effect this Saturday on September 6th, so they're not into effect quite yet.
Okay.
But those were introduced to the city council in this past December. And the restrictions will run from September 6th to May 20th. And it's that any vehicle, trailer, or combination of the two that exceeds 25 feet in length, 9 feet in height, or 8.5 feet in width are not allowed to be on city roads during that span of time. So people either need to store them on their private property or rent a storage, like a space from a storage company to store their boats or trailers or RVs on. And I believe the restrictions were introduced to council because I spoke to Councilwoman Michelle Aldrich the other day, and she told me it was because she had received a lot of complaints about oversized vehicles blocking a view or like RV slide outs blocking access to sidewalks, and it causes a public safety issue. And then she said they're also really difficult to plow snow around, and it's hard on the city streets because they're heavy. So those were kind of the reasons that she, and I can't remember, it was someone who's not on the council anymore, I think, or the ones who introduced this.
And a lot of the pushback for that has been people not wanting to have to pay for those storage services if they can't keep it on their personal property.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also caused a few random little, I guess, storage spaces to pop up around town. I guess because we definitely would need more room if so many people here own RVs, because that's just what you do in Wyoming. You own RV and you go places. So that's also why the restriction is seasonal, because Michelle Aldrich said that the time period 5 days before Memorial Day to 5 days after Labor Day is the most popular season for oversized vehicles to be used. So they wanted to make sure that people were still able to get out and about in their RVs and with their trailers and boats.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think that's about it. Is there anything else going on down at City Hall that you want to talk about today? Thank you, Alyssa. Good to have you back on the podcast. And now we're going to transition. Here's our arts and entertainment reporter, Taylor Staples, to bring you a roundup of some events coming up in Cheyenne and Laramie County this week.
Today, Friday, September 5th, the Cheyenne Home Show takes place at the Cheyenne Ice and Event Center from noon to 4 p.m. The show also will be tomorrow and Sunday the 7th at the same times. Also, the last Hell on Wheels rodeo and chuck wagon dinner of the season takes place at the Event Center at Archer, with doors opening at 5 p.m. On Saturday, September 6th, there will be a Homestead Rendezvous Conference from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the Laramie County Community College Pathfinder Building, as well as the Chispa Festival from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. at the Cheyenne Depot Plaza. That night, the Cheyenne Symphony Orchestra is hosting their 67th fundraising gala at Little America at 5 p.m. And the Lincoln Cheyenne is hosting a Strange Remedy benefit concert for the Cheyenne Animal Shelter at 7:30 p.m. On Monday, September 8th, the Cowgirls of the West Museum have their monthly luncheon from 11:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Little America, and the library has a Valentine's event from 4:30 to 5:30 p.m. On Tuesday, September 9th, the Cheyenne Women's Connection has an event and chat about life detours and the new senior center from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m. at Red Lion. And Cats and Coffee Connections has a DIY cat house crafting event from 4 to 7 p.m. Later in the night, Art Cheyenne is hosting a fall-themed sketchbook sessions from 5:30 to 7 p.m. at the Cheyenne Botanic Gardens. On Wednesday, September 10th, there's a monthly AARP Cheyenne Community Group meeting from 12:30 to 2 p.m. at the new Laramie County Senior Center, and an Intro to Knitting event at the library from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Lastly, on Thursday, September 11th, the library is hosting a small business showcase from 5:30 to 7 p.m., and the Wyoming State Museum is hosting a State Archives speaker event about the Cheyenne Pump House at 7 p.m. For the full list of events, go to wyomingnews.com/calendar.
And finally, before we close out today, here's a quick recap of some of our top stories and headlines from the past week. Taft Love was unanimously selected by Laramie County and Platte County Commissioners last Friday to fill the vacant State Senate District 6 seat after former Senator Darren Smith resigned to serve as the U.S. Attorney for the District of Wyoming. For the commissioners, the primary issue that set Love apart from the other candidates was his understanding of how property taxes work. Lynn Simons, former Superintendent of Public Instruction for Wyoming, died Saturday at the age of 91 in Cheyenne. She is remembered by family and friends as an intelligent and well-read woman who fought for access to public education for all. Since the city of Cheyenne increased enforcement along Central Avenue corridors between 8th Avenue and Pershing Boulevard in June, the Cheyenne Police Department has issued over 330 tickets. The increase in traffic enforcement was a result of the roadway being designated as a critical traffic control area by the city. And finally, a local man was sentenced to 2 concurrent sentences of 3 to 5 years in prison on Tuesday for his involvement in a drive-by shooting this past December. Demetrius Coletti, 45, was arrested on December 27th after shooting at his sister's boyfriend's truck. He then fled the scene, eluding police and initiating a high-speed chase that ended in his arrest. That's all for this week's episode of Wyoming Watch. Thank you for tuning in, and be sure to check back next Friday for more.